I learned where Celia worked from her roommate. The roommate was quite rude when I asked for Celia's specific schedule. She said she didn't keep track of such things. But I had an objective. I knew Patrick's list, and I loved many of those men. Some of them, perhaps not so much. In the 80s and 90s, and, well, in the aughts as well, I always needed to tell new gallery girls that they must grin and bear so-and-so's comments, or so-and-so's inappropriate requests. Long story short, I was dying to work with a woman. I'd seen the Gorilla Girls posters over the years, of course. I wanted to be a Gorilla Girl. And whenever I tried arousing Patrick's interest in a woman, he'd jokingly accuse me of being a Gorilla Girl. I also grinned and bore it. I'd seen Patrick's name on those lists. It was his name, but I was his assistant. Everyone in the art world who dealt with Patrick was usually actually dealing with me. To see Patrick's name on those posters felt no different than seeing my own name plastered across Soho. So if he was interested in Celia Merode, I would find her. He'd already spent nearly an hour at the light table to find Merode. I knew he wouldn't look at any more slides himself. So I did coax her roommate to grudgingly tell me that Celia worked at an artist supply store on Avenue A, and at a thrift shop near Astor Place, and at Manic Panic on St. Mark's in the East Village. I'd never heard of the first two, but I lived a block away from Manic Panic. I started to drop in before and after work, which made me more than a tad bit nervous. See, the establishment was still very well, I suppose they might call it punk then, and I was the opposite of punk. I'd walk in wearing my little black dress, the de facto outfit for nearly every day at the gallery, and there would invariably be somebody infinitely cooler than me working behind the counter. I was still very fresh from Connecticut then, mind you. No, the artists that we worked with at our gallery never really made me nervous, but walking into Manic Panic always made me feel as if I'd just taken the train across Long Island instead of the Hampton Jitney. The place was minuscule. My parents in Darien had bedroom closets that were much larger, and they had all these pairs of shoes hanging by nails on the wall. They didn't have shoe racks, and they had all these vintage clothes and all the little tubs of hair dye, and of course the incredibly cool girls working behind the counter. And they always looked something like Kate Bush or Lydia Lunch. So I may have flinched when they greeted me with a very warm smile. I thought they mocked me that first time, though I quickly realized that they were merely relaxed compared to anyone we hired at our own front desks. I always asked about Celia, and they told me how much they loved her, but no, she wouldn't be in that day. I'd need to come back. I don't know what I pictured, but she wasn't quite what I expected. Her hair wasn't dyed like any of the other girls, and she was bobbing along to the music on the stereo. She seemed happy. None of the men that Patrick worked with were ever particularly happy, unless they were very drunk. But on the other hand, when some of them were very drunk, they were very mean. I pulled one of Celia's slides out of my purse and held it up as if it was a badge, as if I was sent by the FBI or something. I asked, "Are you Celia Merode?" She seemed surprised by the slide. She took it from my hand and held it up to the light. She said, "Yeah, this is me." I introduced myself and reached to shake her hand, but she hesitated. I said, "I've tried reaching you for some time now." And after awkwardly holding my hand out for another 5 seconds, she finally reached to shake it. She said, "You've left a lot of messages." I told her yes, I had. My apologies, I hope I haven't filled your answering machine. And she asked, "Why hasn't Bowman called me himself?" Well, I said, "He's very busy, but he's very interested in seeing your work in person. Maybe something from the figure drawing show?" I tried visiting Daryl Stanton, but he said that you weren't working together anymore. So I hope that perhaps you sold these works in editions." And without any emotion, she said, "I burned them." "You burned them?" And she repeated it. "Burned them, up in flames, kaput. It wasn't what I wanted out in the world." I said, "I see. Well, do you have other pieces?" And she asked, "Does Patrick Bowman want to see pieces from this series?" She waved the slide in the air. And I said, "I think that would be helpful. He actually saw that show. He remembered it. It's what made him want to see your work again." And she said, "Then I don't think we can work together," and turned to the store's stereo. I nearly had to yell, "You can't?" because she turned up the music so loudly. I believe she said, "No, I think it'd be best if I looked elsewhere for representation." I tried not to be offended, or not to offend her, but this was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. I said, Do you have other potential gallerists looking at your work?" And she finally turned back to me and said, "I've been talking to people at AIR and someone at Collab. I'm pretty sure I'm going to line up another show soon." These were artist collectives. I liked their work, of course, and many women like Jenny Holzer and Kiki Smith had started their careers with them. But these were comparatively small operations. I was giving Celia an opportunity to bypass them. Not knowing what else to do, I said, "I'm going to leave my card. I loved your figure drawing show. I really did. And I'm going to be your #1 advocate. I can practically guarantee that we'd show 1 or 2 of your pieces in a group show. Patrick would really like to diversify his list. He really would. And if the pieces sell, I will convince him to take you on as a client. You will be able to bypass showing your work at artist-run spaces. You won't need to work 3 jobs anymore. But if nothing else, if you work with us, if we can form a relationship, you will be able to spend much more of your time making art." She didn't even raise an eyebrow. I left the card on the counter, not knowing if she'd ever pick it up. Weeks later, I noticed that Manic Panic had closed. I heard that rent doubled. So Celia was down to 2 jobs. If she hadn't been fired from her second job at the thrift shop soon after, she might not have felt desperate enough to walk through our gallery's door with my card.